The Mafia boss mocked the waitress. "Sell me these roses in Italian, and I'll pay you $500,000. She spoke without hesitation, words that made him freeze. What she said was impossible. Those were his dead wife's last words, written in a letter no one else had ever seen. The bullet hole in the marble table was still warm. Luca Ferraro didn't flinch as his espresso cup sat inches from it. Around him, the Riverside Cafe had cleared in seconds, tourists scattering like pigeons, chairs knocked over, a child's gelato melting on the cobblestones. Only his 3 men remained standing, guns barely concealed beneath their jackets. "Clean this up," Luca muttered, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd given that order too many times. At 32, he looked older, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. His second-in-command, Marco, holstered his weapon. "The Bavarian sends his regards, boss. Says the deal's off." "The deal's never off," Luca's fingers drummed against the table. "It just got more expensive." That's when he heard it, the soft scrape of a brush against canvas. In the corner of the cafe, still seated at a small table cluttered with paint tubes and coffee-stained napkins, was a woman who hadn't run. She wore a black apron with a cafe's logo, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her hand moved steadily across a small canvas, painting red roses that seemed to bleed into the white background. She hadn't even looked up during the gunshot. Luca felt something unfamiliar. Curiosity. "You," he called out. "Waitress." She finished her brushstroke before turning. Her eyes were hazel, almost amber in the afternoon light, and they held no fear. Only mild annoyance at being interrupted. "The cafe's closed," she said simply, returning to her painting. Marco took a step forward, but Luca raised his hand. He stood, walking slowly toward her table, his expensive shoes clicking against the tile. Up close, he could see the roses more clearly. They weren't perfect. Wild. Chaotic. Beautiful in their imperfection. "You didn't run," he observed. "I've seen worse than a gun," she replied, mixing red and black on her palette. "At least bullets are honest about what they do." Something in her voice, bitter but not broken, made him pause. He picked up one of the finished canvases leaning against the wall. More roses. Dozens of them, painted in different styles, different lights. Some drowning in dark water, some growing from cracked concrete. "You paint a lot of roses. They're all I can afford to paint," she said. "Flowers don't charge modeling fees." Despite himself, Luca almost smiled. "What's your name?" "Elena Rossi." She finally met his eyes fully. "And, before you ask, I'm saving for an exhibition. The Galleria dell'Accademia has a slot open in 3 months. Entry fee is €5,000. I have 800 inch. So, you paint between serving coffee." "I paint between surviving." She set down her brush. "Is there something you want, or are you just here to critique my life choices?" Luca should have walked away. Should have left with his men, dealt with the Bavarian problem, returned to his villa where everything was controlled and predictable. But something about this woman, this stubborn artist who painted roses in a cafe that still smelled like gunpowder, held him there. "I'll make you a deal," he said, his voice taking on the tone he used in negotiations. Dangerous. Playful. "Sell me these roses. In Italian. Convince me why they're worth buying." Elena raised an eyebrow. "You want me to sell you paintings?"
No.
"I want you to sell me the idea of roses. In your language. Make me believe they matter." He leaned against her table. "Do that, and I'll pay you €500,000. The cafe went silent. Even Marco looked shocked. Elena studied him for a long moment, her painter's eyes taking in details others might miss, the exhaustion in his posture, the expensive watch that didn't match the sadness in his face, the way he held himself like a man carrying ghosts. Then she stood. "Lo Rose," she began softly in Italian, her voice transforming into something almost musical. "Crescono nei canali più sporchi di Venezia." The roses grow in Venice's dirtiest canals. She picked up one of her paintings, roses emerging from dark, polluted water. Everyone sees the filth, the decay, the poison. But the roses? They pushed through anyway. She moved closer, and Luca caught the scent of paint and something floral, jasmine, maybe. People think beauty needs perfect conditions. Sunshine, clean soil, protection. Her eyes locked onto his. But the most beautiful things grow in the worst places. They grow because of the darkness, not despite it. Because beauty refuses to die, even when everything around it is dying. She set the painting down. The roses don't apologize for blooming in polluted water. They don't ask permission. They just are. And that quello is why they matter. Because they prove that something pure can exist in a corrupted world. The silence that followed was absolute. Luca felt his chest tighten. Those words, that phrase, beauty refuses to die, he'd heard it before, years ago, written in curled handwriting in a letter that had arrived the day before his wife vanished. A letter he'd memorized. A letter no one else had ever seen. Remember, amore mio, beauty refuses to die, even when I do. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. He pulled out a blank check, wrote the amount, and signed it without breaking eye contact. The exhibition, he said quietly. It's yours. Elena stared at the check, then at him. This is insane. You don't even know me. No, Luca agreed, his voice strained. But you knew my wife. What? He was already walking away, his men following quickly. At the door, he stopped without turning back. Who taught you that phrase? About beauty refusing to die? Elena's voice came softly behind him. No one. It came to me, like someone whispered it in a dream. Luca closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were darker. Keep painting, he said, and left. Behind him, Elena stood holding a check for 500,000 euros, her hands shaking, not understanding why she felt like she'd just spoken to a ghost. Or perhaps, why she felt like she'd been won. Luca's villa sat on a private island, 15 minutes by speedboat from Venice's main canals. Most people called it a fortress. He called it a tomb. At 2 a.m., he stood in his study, a room lined with books he'd never read and art he'd never appreciated. His wife had decorated it. He'd never changed a thing. In his hands, he held a leather journal, worn, water-stained, the pages yellowed. He'd read it 1,000 times, but tonight the words felt different. Alive. Amore mio, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Don't look for me. Some debts can't be paid with money or power. But remember, beauty refuses to die. Even when I do, the roses in our garden will bloom long after I mash. Let them remind you that love doesn't end. It transforms. His wife, Julia, had disappeared 3 years ago. No body. No witnesses. Just this letter and a single red rose left on their bed. The police called it a kidnapping. His enemies sent condolences. But Luca knew the truth. She'd learned too much about his world, and his world had swallowed her whole. He'd never forgiven himself. Boss. Marco stood in the doorway, tablet in hand. You wanted information on the girl. Tell me. Elena Rossi. 30 years old. Parents died in a car accident when she was 19. No siblings. Works 3 jobs. Waitress, art supply store clerk, and night custodian at a museum. Paints obsessively. No criminal record. No connections to any families. Social life. Barely exists. Her neighbors say she's polite but distant. The only place she goes regularly is an abandoned greenhouse near Giudecca. She paints there. Lucas set down the journal. And before today, had she ever been to my territories? Any of my establishments? Marco hesitated. No, boss. Which is what makes this strange. There's no way she could know about your wife. They never met. Different worlds entirely. Yet she quoted Julia's last words. Could be coincidence. You don't believe in coincidence, Lucas said flatly. Neither do I. He walked to the window, overlooking the dark water. Somewhere across that darkness, Elena was probably still awake, probably still painting, holding a check that would change her life without understanding why. Have someone watch her. Discreetly. I want to know everywhere she goes, everything she paints. Boss, Marco's voice carried warning. If the other families find out you're interested in some random girl, then they'll think I'm getting soft. Lucas smiled without humor. Let them think it. Soft men make better targets. Better targets make mistakes. After Marco left, Luca returned to Julia's journal, flipping through pages of her handwriting, her thoughts, her fears about his lifestyle. On the last page, she'd drawn something, a simple sketch of roses growing from water, half submerged, reaching toward light. Exactly like the painting Elena had shown him. His phone buzzed. A message from Marco. You need to see this. Below was a photo, taken through a window, of Elena's apartment. The walls were covered in canvases. But it wasn't the quantity that made Luca's blood run cold. It was the subjects. A man in a black suit standing at the edge of a canal, holding blood-red roses. The angle, the posture, the setting, it was the exact spot where Luca had stood the night Julia disappeared, the roses he'd dropped into the water after finding her letter. A woman's hand reaching up from dark water, a wedding ring catching moonlight. A villa on an island, lights burning in a single window. His life. His memories. His guilt, painted by a woman who shouldn't know any of it. Luca's hands clenched into fists. Meanwhile, across the water, Elena sat surrounded by those same paintings, her hands stained with paint that wouldn't wash off. She didn't remember painting half of them. She'd wake up at 3 a.m., covered in dried paint, new canvases completed. Images from dreams that felt more like memories, a man's face she'd never seen but somehow knew. A voice whispering in Italian, always the same words. Make him see the light through the roses. Make him remember beauty can be reborn. Tonight was worse. The dreams were getting stronger. She'd painted until her fingers bled, trying to exorcise whatever haunted her. The latest canvas showed a woman underwater, eyes open, reaching not for the surface, but toward a rose blooming impossibly in the depths. Elena had painted the woman's face without thinking. Only when she stepped back did she realize she'd given the drowning woman her own eyes. The check for 500,000 euros sat on her table, and beside it, a single red rose that definitely hadn't been there when she'd come home.
No vas.
No note. Just a rose, fresh and perfect, lying on her windowsill. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Somehow, she knew exactly whose fingers had last held this flower. And somehow, she knew his name before anyone had spoken it.
Luca.
The rose slipped from her fingers. Outside, in the shadows of the canal, a figure watched her window, then disappeared into the Venice night like smoke. The art supply store smelled like linseed oil and old paper. Elena had worked there for 2 years, and it was the only job she actually enjoyed. Here, surrounded by pigments and canvas, she could pretend her life was normal. She was restocking brushes when the bell above the door chimed. Welcome to Arte e Anima. How can I? The words died in her throat. Luca Ferraro stood in the doorway, looking completely out of place among the watercolor sets and sketchbooks. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, but his eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, were fixed on her with an intensity that made her step back. We need to talk, he said simply. The store doesn't allow solicitation, Elena replied, gripping a paintbrush like a weapon. Or criminals. I'm a legitimate businessman. With bullet holes in your coffee table. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. The table had it coming, he moved closer, and she noticed he carried a leather portfolio. I meant what I said yesterday. Your exhibition. I want to sponsor it. I already have your check. Which I haven't cashed, by the way. She crossed her arms. What do you really want? Lucas set the portfolio on the counter between them. Open it. Against her better judgment, she did. Inside were photographs. Her paintings. All of them, including the ones she kept in her apartment. The private ones. The ones no one should have seen. Her face flushed with anger. You broke into my home. I had someone photograph through your window. There's a difference. That's not better. I know he didn't apologize. But I needed to understand something. These paintings, he pulled out the photo of the man with roses at the canal. You've painted my life. Moments no one witnessed. Places no one knows. How? Elena's anger faltered. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie, his voice was soft but firm. You painted me at the Canal Grande on March 15th, 3 years ago. That's the exact spot, the exact position I stood in. I was alone that night. Completely alone. Yet you've captured it perfectly. She stared at the photograph, her mind racing. I paint from dreams. Images that come to me. I don't choose them. Dreams of my dead wife. The air left the room. Elena looked up at him, seeing the raw pain in his expression. I don't understand any of this. I've never met your wife. I don't even know who you really are, except that you're clearly dangerous and now stalking me. Her name was Julia. Luca pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. A beautiful woman with dark hair and a radiant smile. She disappeared 3 years ago. The night you painted me, holding roses. Elena studied the photo, and something twisted in her chest. Recognition.
Impossible, inexplicable recognition.
I'm sorry for your loss, she whispered. But I can't help you. I'm not some psychic or... I'm not asking you to be, he closed the portfolio. I'm asking you to let me sponsor your exhibition properly. Not just money, connections, venue, publicity. The Galleria dell'Accademia is small time. I can get you into the Peggy Guggenheim collection. Elena's eyes widened. The Guggenheim was every Venetian artist's dream. Why would you do that? Because your art deserves to be seen, he paused. And because I need to understand why you're painting my life. That's insane. So is a waitress quoting my dead wife's last words, his jaw tightened. So is finding a rose on your windowsill that I left there, even though your building is locked and your apartment is on the 4th floor. Her blood ran cold. That was you? I needed to know if you'd recognize it. If you'd know it was from me, he leaned forward. And you did. I saw your face through the window. You knew my name before anyone told you. Elena's hands trembled. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. She had known. The moment she'd seen that rose, his name had echoed in her mind like a memory. I have one condition, she said finally, her voice barely steady. You don't interfere with my art. You don't tell me what to paint. You don't control the narrative. Agreed. And you tell me the truth about your wife. All of it. Luca's expression darkened. That's not a story with a happy ending. I don't paint happy endings, Elena said. I paint truth. For a long moment, they stood on opposite sides of the counter, a criminal and an artist, both haunted by the same ghost. There's an art opening tonight at the CA Pesaro, Luca said. Meet me there at 8. We'll discuss terms. And I'll tell you about Julia. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door.
Ellen?
Yes. Stop painting me standing at that canal. It's the worst memory of my life, and I don't need it immortalized. After he left, Elena looked down at the portfolio he'd forgotten, or deliberately left behind. Inside was one more photograph she hadn't seen before. A painting she'd made last week. 2 people standing in a greenhouse, surrounded by roses, reaching toward each other, but not quite touching. She hadn't painted their faces. But somehow, she knew exactly who they were meant to be. Elena had never been inside a place like CA Pesaro. The Baroque Palace Turn Museum dripped with wealth, crystal chandeliers, marble floors polished to mirrors, and guests wearing more jewelry than her entire apartment was worth. She felt like an imposter in her simple black dress, clutching a cheap purse. Then she saw Luca. He stood near a sculpture, surrounded by men in expensive suits, but his attention found her immediately. He excused himself and crossed the gallery, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. You came, he said. You promised answers. After, he gestured to the artwork around them. First, I want you to see something. He led her through the crowd to a private viewing room, quieter, dimmer. Inside hung a single portrait, a woman in a garden, surrounded by roses, her smile both sad and knowing. Elena's breath caught. The woman in the painting could have been her sister. Same bone structure, same eyes, same expression she made when she was lost in thought while painting. "That's Julia," Luca said quietly. "My wife." "We look." I know his voice was strained. "I noticed it the moment I saw you at the cafe. But I told myself it was grief, my mind playing tricks. Then you spoke her words. Then your paintings." Elena moved closer to the portrait, studying every brushstroke. The artist had captured something ethereal about Julia, as if she existed halfway between worlds. "Who painted this?"
She did.
Self-portrait, Luca stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker. Julia was an artist too. Not as talented as you, but passionate. She believed art could redeem anything, even souls like mine. What happened to her? Luca was silent for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I was careless. Made enemies who couldn't touch me directly, so they went after her. 3 years ago, she discovered documents, evidence of my dealings. Things that could have destroyed entire families." He closed his eyes. "She told me she wanted out. Wanted us to disappear, start over. I said no. My pride, my power, it mattered more than her fear."
Luca.
"The night she disappeared, she left me a letter. Told me not to look for her, that she was paying a debt. I found a rose on our bed, thorns stained with blood. Her blood, his hands clenched into fists. I searched for 2 years. Every contact, every favor, every thread I could make. Nothing. It was like she'd never existed." Elena's chest tightened with unexpected sympathy. "You think she's dead?" "I know she is. I felt it the moment I found that letter. You don't survive what she knew." He turned to Elena, and his eyes were devastated. "And then you appeared, looking like her, talking like her, painting my memories. Tell me I'm not insane." Before Elena could respond, footsteps echoed in the doorway. "Boss, we have a problem." Marco stood there, his expression urgent. Behind him, Elena glimpsed several men in dark suits scanning the gallery. Luca's entire demeanor shifted, from vulnerable to dangerous, in a heartbeat. "What kind of problem?" "The Bavarians. They're here." "How many?" "6 that we've spotted. Could be more." Luca cursed softly, then turned to Elena. "I need to get you out of here. I can take care of myself." "Not from these people." He gripped her arm, not rough but firm. "They saw us together at the cafe. If they think you matter to me, you become leverage. I don't matter to you. We just met." His eyes locked onto hers, and something unspoken passed between them. "That's not entirely true anymore, is it?" Before she could process what that meant, gunshots cracked through the gallery. Screams erupted. Guests scattered. Luca pulled Elena behind a marble column as bullets chipped away at priceless art. "Stay down," he commanded, pulling a gun from beneath his jacket. Marco and 2 other men returned fire, creating a corridor of chaos. Through the smoke and panic, Elena saw them, the Bavarians, cold-eyed men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. One of them locked eyes with her and smiled. "The girl," he called out in accented Italian. "Give us the girl, Ferraro, and we leave peacefully." Luca's jaw tightened. "Not happening. She looks just like your dead wife." "Interesting coincidence." The Bavarian's voice was mocking. "Or is it? Maybe we should ask her what she knows about Julia's final days." Elena's blood ran cold. "What is he talking about?" "He's trying to get in your head." Luca returned fire, forcing the Bavarians back. "Don't listen." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Marco threw something, smoke grenades, and the room filled with thick, white fog. "Move!" Luca grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her through a service exit. They ran through servants' corridors, footsteps echoing behind them, until they burst out into Venice's labyrinth of alleys. The night swallowed them whole. They ran through narrow passages, over bridges, past sleeping canals. Luca knew every turn, every shadow. Finally, breathless, they stopped in a small courtyard, hidden from the main paths. Elena leaned against a wall, heart pounding. Your life is insane. I know. Luca checked his gun, then holstered it. I'm sorry you got pulled into this. That man, what did he mean about Julia's final days? Luca's expression shuddered. Nothing. He was fishing. But Elena saw the lie in his eyes. And for the first time, she wondered if the ghost haunting them both was trying to tell her something Luca didn't want her to know. 3 days passed before Elena heard from Luca again. 3 days of looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, sleeping with a kitchen knife under her pillow. The Guggenheim exhibition was scheduled for 2 months out, but she could barely focus on painting. Every time she picked up a brush, her hands shook. The rose he'd left on her windowsill had wilted, its petals turning black. On the 4th morning, a text arrived from an unknown number, the greenhouse at Giudecca.
Noon. Come alone. Elle.
She should have ignored it, should have cashed his check and disappeared to another city. But curiosity, or something deeper, pulled her to the abandoned greenhouse she'd been using as a secret studio for years. How did he even know about this place? The greenhouse sat behind a crumbling villa, forgotten by time and tourists. Broken glass panels let in shafts of dusty sunlight. Wild roses had overtaken everything, climbing through cracks, reclaiming the space from human hands. Elena had hidden her most private paintings here, the ones too raw, too strange to show anyone. When she arrived, Luca was already inside, standing before her canvases like a man at a funeral. How did you find this place? She demanded. I had you followed, no apology in his voice. After the shooting, I needed to know where you went, if you were safe. That's called stalking. I prefer protective surveillance. He turned to face her, and she noticed he looked different, tired, haunted, wearing jeans and a simple shirt instead of his usual suits. Almost human. But that's not why I ask you here. He gestured to the paintings surrounding them. Elena's private collection. Dozens of canvases showing scenes she couldn't explain, a woman drowning in moonlit water, reaching not for help but for something deeper. A man kneeling in a rose garden, holding a gun to his own head. A wedding ring sinking through darkness. 2 shadows merging into one. These, Luca said, his voice barely above a whisper, are Julia's last days. Every single 1 inch. Elena's stomach dropped. That's impossible. I painted these from dreams. The night she disappeared, she went to the canal where I proposed to her. She wore her wedding dress. She'd written letters to people she'd never met, instructions for a life she wouldn't live. He moved to a painting of the woman underwater. The police found her dress 3 days later. Just the dress. No body.
Luca.
This painting, he pointed to the man with the gun in the rose garden. That was me, 2 weeks after she vanished. I sat in our garden with my father's pistol, ready to end it. Then a rose bloomed. In winter. Impossible, but it happened. And I couldn't do it. Elena's legs felt weak. How am I painting things I couldn't possibly know? That's what I've been trying to understand. He pulled out a worn photograph from his pocket. Julia standing in this very greenhouse, smiling at the camera, surrounded by roses. This was her favorite place. She'd paint here for hours. I bought this property for her, kept it private. No one knew about it except us. The air felt too thin. But I've been painting here for 2 years, Elena whispered. The realtor said it was abandoned, available for artists to use. I never hired a realtor. Luca's eyes were dark. After Julia died, I locked this place up. Haven't been back since. Elena's mind raced. Then how did I find it? Know about it? He stepped closer. That's not the strangest part. Look at this. He led her to a corner she rarely used, behind an overgrown rose bush. There, hidden beneath years of dust and fallen petals, was a wooden panel in the floor. Luca pulled it open, revealing a small space beneath. Inside were more canvases. Old ones. Water damaged, but still visible. Julia's paintings. And they were identical to Elena's. Same style. Same subjects. Same impossible scenes of drowning and rebirth and roses blooming in darkness. She was dreaming too, Luca said hoarsely. In her diary, she wrote about visions, a woman with her face who would come after she was gone. A woman who would paint what she couldn't finish. She called it the transfer of unfinished beauty. Elena knelt beside the paintings, hands trembling. In one of Julia's canvases, barely visible through water damage, was a figure, a woman who looked exactly like Elena, standing in this greenhouse, painting. She painted me, Elena breathed. Before we ever met. She painted you 3 years before you found this place. The implications crashed over Elena like a wave. What are you saying? That I'm possessed? That her ghost is? I'm saying something impossible is happening, and I don't know if it's a gift or a curse. Luca pulled out Julia's diary, the one he'd been reading that first night. Her last entry. Read it. Elena took the leather journal with shaking hands. If you're reading this, Luca, I'm already gone. But don't bore me completely. I'm not entirely leaving. I've made arrangements. There's a girl, not born yet or perhaps just beginning her life, who will carry what I cannot finish. She'll find this greenhouse. She'll paint my truth. And maybe, through her, you'll finally understand that beauty refuses to die. It only transforms. Love her for me. Love her as me. Love her as herself. She is my second chance and yours. Her name will be Elena. The diary slipped from Elena's fingers. She knew my name, Elena whispered. How did she know my name? Luca's voice was raw. I don't know, but I think Julia didn't just disappear. I think she became you. Elena didn't go home that night. She couldn't. The greenhouse felt safer than her apartment, even with broken glass and wild roses clawing through the walls. Luca had offered his villa, but she'd refused. Being near him felt too dangerous now, in ways that had nothing to do with bullets. She lay on a paint-stained tarp, staring at the moonlight filtering through shattered panels, trying to process the impossible. She is my second chance and yours. Julia's words echoed in her mind. Elena touched her own face, her own hands, reassuring herself she was real. Solid. Not a ghost wearing borrowed skin. But then why did Julia's paintings feel like memories instead of discoveries? Why did standing in this greenhouse feel like coming home? Around 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. Luca, are you still there? She typed back. Where else would I go? Let me send Marco to watch the perimeter.
No.
I need to be alone. A pause, then. You're not alone.
You know that now.
Elena turned off her phone. She picked up a brush, hands moving automatically, and began to paint. The canvas filled with images she didn't choose. A woman's face split down the middle, half Julia, half Elena. Rose vines stitching them together like surgical thread. And in the background, barely visible, a figure in shadow. Watching. Waiting. A sound from outside jolted her from the trance. Footsteps. Multiple. Elena's heart hammered. She grabbed the nearest weapon, a palette knife, and moved behind a pillar overgrown with thorns. The greenhouse door creaked open. Pretty place for a dead woman's studio, a voice said in German-accented Italian. The Bavarians. 3 men entered, armed, tactical flashlights cutting through the darkness. Elena recognized the leader, the one who'd smiled at her during the shooting at CA, Pesaro. She's not here, Klaus, one of them said, scanning the space. But she was. Paint still wet, Klaus moved to Elena's latest canvas, studying it with interest. Fascinating. Ferraro's wife was an artist too. Same greenhouse. Same obsession with roses, he touched the painting. Same madness. Boss said to bring her in alive. Boss says a lot of things. Klaus pulled out a knife, slashing through Elena's canvas casually. But Ferraro needs to learn that nothing he loves survives. Not his wife. Not this girl. Not his pathetic empire. Elena's grip tightened on the palette knife. 3 armed men. One of her. Terrible odds. Then her phone, still on the ground where she'd left it, buzzed loudly. Klaus spun toward the sound. There.
Elena bolted.
She ran deeper into the greenhouse, through sections so overgrown they were almost jungle. Thorns tore at her clothes, her skin. Behind her, shouts and footsteps. A gunshot shattered a glass panel near her head. "Alive, Klaus," one of them yelled. "Accidents happen," Klaus called back. Elena's mind raced. The greenhouse had an old service exit in the back. She'd found it months ago, but never used it. If she could reach it. Hands grabbed her from behind. She spun, driving the palette knife toward her attacker's throat. He jerked back, and she managed to slash his arm instead. He cursed in German, releasing her. She ran again, lungs burning. The service door was ahead, rusted, covered in vines, but there. She grabbed the handle just as something slammed into the door from outside. It burst open, and Luca Ferraro stepped through, gun raised, eyes murderous. "Get behind me," he commanded. For once, Elena didn't argue. Luca fired 3 precise shots. 2 Bavarians went down screaming. Klaus dove behind a pillar, returning fire. The greenhouse erupted into chaos, muzzle flashes, breaking glass, Marco and 2 other men flooding in from the main entrance. "This way." Luca grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her through the service exit into Venice's maze of back alleys. They ran through darkness, the sounds of fighting fading behind them. They didn't stop until they reached a small bridge over a quiet canal, both gasping for breath. "How did you know?"
Elena panted.
"You turned off your phone." "That scared me more than anything." Luca checked his gun, reloading. "I had Marco stationed nearby, just in case." "You said you wouldn't send him."
Primelit, no apologi.
"These people, Elena, they won't stop. Not until they've destroyed everything I care about." "I'm not something you care about. We barely know each other." Luca's eyes locked onto hers, and the intensity there stole her breath. "You're wearing Julia's face. Speaking her words. Painting her truth. You found her secret place, the one only she and I knew existed. You're either a miracle or a ghost, and I don't know which terrifies me more." His voice cracked. "But that man in there was right about one thing. I can't protect what I love. I've failed before." "Then stop loving things," Elena said, her voice sharper than intended. Too late, the words hung between them like a confession. Elena felt something shift in her chest, recognition, desire, fear all tangled together. She stepped closer, close enough to see the scar above his left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You can't keep living between roses and blood," she whispered. "I know." His hand came up, almost touching her face, then falling. "But I don't know how to stop." Behind them, sirens wailed. Marco appeared from the shadows. "Boss, we need to move. Police are coming," and Klaus escaped. Luca nodded, but his eyes never left Elena. "This exhibition, we're accelerating it. 2 weeks. I'll call in every favor I have. The moment you're publicly recognized, you become too visible to kill quietly. And if that doesn't work,"
His jaw tightened.
"then I burn everything down to keep you safe." As they disappeared into Venice's shadows, Elena realized the most dangerous thing wasn't the Bavarians or Luca's world. It was the way her heart recognized him, as if Julia's love hadn't died. It had just been waiting for a new body to remember how to beat. 2 weeks felt like 2 minutes. The Peggy Guggenheim Collection's gallery space had been transformed overnight. White walls, perfect lighting, security that could rival a bank vault. Outside, Venice's elite gathered in designer gowns and tailored suits, waiting for the doors to open. Elena stood in the back room, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror. The dress Luca had sent was simple but elegant, deep crimson, the color of roses, with a neckline that dipped just low enough to be daring. Her hair was styled in soft waves, makeup subtle but flawless. She looked like someone else. Or maybe She looked like Julia. Stop it, she whispered to herself. You're Elena. Just Elena.
But was she?
The past 2 weeks had been a blur of preparation, interrupted by nightmares that felt more like memories. In her dreams, she drowned nightly, not struggling, but sinking peacefully into dark water while roses bloomed around her. And always, Luca's voice calling her name. Sometimes he called her Elena. Sometimes Julia. A knock at the door. Marco's voice. 5 minutes, Miss Rossi. She took a deep breath and opened the door. The gallery was packed. Critics, collectors, socialites. And in the back corner, partially hidden by shadows, Luca Ferraro in a simple dark suit. Not his usual tailored armor. Something softer. Almost vulnerable. Their eyes met across the room, and Elena felt that strange recognition again. Not love. Not yet, but the ghost of it. The shape of something that once was, and might be again. The exhibition was titled Roses of the Lost, 23 paintings chronicling drowning and rebirth, death and transformation, beauty refusing to die in the darkest places. Elena watched as guests moved from piece to piece, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to something like awe. A critic from Il Gazzettino stood transfixed before the largest canvas, the woman underwater, split between Julia and Elena, roses stitching them together. It's like she's painting the soul's reincarnation, the critic murmured to her companion. The way grief transforms into hope. An elderly collector stopped before the painting of the man in the rose garden, gun in hand. There's something deeply personal here, almost confessional. It's not confessional. A woman's voice cut through the murmur. It's prophetic. Elena turned. A woman in her 60s approached, elegantly dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She extended her hand.
Contessa Vittoria Bassano.
I knew Julia Ferraro. Elena's heart stuttered. You knew. Luca's wife. Yes, the Contessa studied Elena's face with unsettling intensity. The resemblance is remarkable. But it's more than that, isn't it? You paint like her. Move like her. That way you tilt your head when considering a painting. Pure Julia. I never met her. I know. That's what makes this so extraordinary. The Contessa leaned closer, her voice dropping. Julia came to me 3 months before she disappeared. She was terrified but certain. She said she discovered something about consciousness, about how love and art could transcend death. I thought grief had made her mad. Elena's mouth went dry. What did she discover? She never got to tell me. But she said, when I'm gone, look for the girl who paints roses in dark water. She'll finish what I started. The Contessa's eyes glistened. Here you are. Before Elena could respond, applause erupted. A gallery representative stepped forward with a champagne glass raised. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that 5 of Miss Rossi's works have been purchased tonight for a combined €600,000. And the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence has requested a showing next season. More applause. Elena felt dizzy. Through the crowd, she saw Luca. He wasn't applauding. He was staring at the central painting, the one of 2 figures in a greenhouse, reaching for each other but not quite touching. She'd finally painted their faces. His face. Her face. Both of them caught between past and future, between Julia's ghost and Elena's reality. As the crowd celebrated, Elena slipped through a side door onto a balcony, overlooking the Grand Canal. The November air was cold, but she needed it. Footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. You did it, Luca said quietly, joining her at the railing. You're legitimate now. Recognized. Protected by visibility. Is that all this was? Protection? No, he was silent for a moment. I've been meeting with my lawyers. Transferring assets, setting up trusts, severing ties with the families. It'll take time, but I'm getting out. Elena turned to look at him. Why? Because you were right. I can't keep living between roses and blood. His hand rested on the railing, inches from hers. And because Julia gave me a second chance through you, and I'm not wasting it. I'm not Julia. I know his voice was rough with emotion. You're something more. You're her truth and your own life, combined. And he stopped, struggling. I don't know if what I feel is for you, or for her, or for both of you. But I know it's real. Elena's hand moved to cover his. 3 months ago, she said softly, I was alone. No family, no future, just paint and dreams I couldn't explain. Now I'm standing here, wearing a dead woman's face, haunted by her love for you, and I don't know where she ends and I begin. Does it matter? She thought about Julia's diary entry. Love her for me. Love her as me. Love her as herself. Maybe not, Elena whispered. Inside, the gallery erupted in conversation. Critics debated, collectors negotiated, and Elena Rossi's name spread through Venice like wildfire. But out on the balcony, 2 people stood in silence, hands touching, both trying to understand if love could truly refuse to die, or if it simply found new forms to bloom in. 1 year later, the rooftop studio had been Luca's final gift before he left the criminal world completely. 6 floors above Venice's winding streets, with a view of the canals turning gold in the morning light, Elena had built her sanctuary. Canvas-covered walls, paint-splattered floors, the scent of turpentine and coffee always in the air. She'd been painting since 4 a.m., something she did less from compulsion now and more from joy. The nightmares had faded. The dreams of drowning had transformed into dreams of flying. Julia's ghost had finally let go. Or perhaps, more accurately, Julia's ghost had finally finished what it came to do. Elena heard footsteps on the stairs, familiar, unhurried. She smiled without turning. You're early, she called out. Couldn't sleep. Luca appeared in the doorway carrying 2 espresso cups and a bouquet of red roses. Not expensive florist roses, but wild ones from the market, thorns and all. Thought you might need caffeine. He'd changed over the past year. The shadows under his eyes had lightened. He smiled more. Laughed, even. The transition out of the Mafia had been brutal. Threats, betrayals, 2 attempts on his life. But he'd survived. They'd survived. Marco had taken over legitimate business operations. The violent empire was dismantled piece by piece, sold or destroyed. Luca Ferraro was no longer a name that made men flinch. He was just Luca. And that was enough. Elena accepted the coffee, their fingers brushing in a way that still sent electricity through her. Some things never changed. What are you working on? He asked, moving to her easel. The painting showed Venice at sunrise, canals reflecting light, and in the center, a single rose growing from the water, half submerged, half reaching toward the sky. No longer drowning. Transcending. It's the last one, Elena said softly. The final piece of a series. Luca studied it, understanding in his eyes. She's really gone, isn't she? Not gone.
Just.
Quiet. Elena set down her brush. I don't hear her voice anymore. Don't dream her memories. But sometimes, when I paint, I feel her satisfaction. Like she's proud of what we became. We couldn't have become this without her, Luca said. I know. It was true. Julia had orchestrated everything, the meeting, the words, the paintings that drew them together. She'd been the architect of her own reincarnation, not in body, but in purpose. She'd known Luca needed someone to save him from himself, and Elena needed someone to believe her art mattered. So she'd built a bridge between them with roses and paint and impossible dreams. Luca set down the bouquet and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's breath caught.
Luca.
Wait, he opened it, revealing not a ring, but a key. Antique brass, worn smooth. It's to the greenhouse. The deed is in your name now. I want you to have it. Make it yours, not hers. Paint there, teach there, burn it down if you want. But it's yours. Tears pricked Elena's eyes. The greenhouse had haunted her for so long, Julia's ghost strongest there. But lately, she'd begun to reclaim it, teaching art classes to local children, filling it with new memories. Thank you, she whispered. There's one more thing. He pulled out a folded paper. I found this in Julia's studio, hidden in one of her old canvases. Must have been there for years. Elena unfolded it carefully. Julia's handwriting. Dear Elena, because that will be your name, comma, if you're reading this, it means everything worked. You found him. You saved him. You became the bridge between his darkness and light. Don't fear me. I'm not haunting you. I'm thanking you. You gave me what I couldn't have. Time. Time to finish the work, to prove that love doesn't end when we do. It transforms. You are not me. You are magnificently yourself. But you carry my love forward, and that's enough.
Paint boldly.
Love fearlessly. And tell Luca I forgive him. I always did. With gratitude, Julia. P.S. The roses in the greenhouse? They'll bloom in winter for you. I made sure of it. Elena wiped her eyes, laughing through tears. She really thought of everything. She was always 3 steps ahead. Luca agreed, his own voice thick. He took Elena's hands, pulling her close. The morning sun painted them both in gold, turning the rooftop into something between dream and reality. So, he said, echoing their first meeting with a soft smile. How much for these roses now? Elena looked at the wild bouquet, then at him. This man who'd walked through hell and back, who'd loved a ghost enough to let her go, who'd chosen redemption over power. She answered in Italian, her voice steady and sure. Hai già pagato, con la tua anima. You've already paid with your soul. Luca's eyes shone. And was it worth it? Elena kissed him, tasting coffee and possibility, and the promise of a future they'd built from impossible beginnings. Every thorn, she whispered against his lips. Every drop of blood. Every rose. Below them, Venice awakened. Gondoliers called to tourists. Church bells rang. The canals reflected morning light like liquid gold. And in the greenhouse across the water, roses bloomed in November, impossible, defiant, beautiful.
Refusing to die.
Choosing, instead, to transform.
The end.